I opened the door to my apartment, and immediately my cat was all over me. Nala was a huge white and gold mix of who knows how many breeds, but she loved me. She wasn't happy that I was gone for a couple of days at a time at work. I dropped my bag on the chair by the door and petted her until she calmed down. I got a can of Fancy Feast tuna and dropped in her bowl to give me enough time to settle in. I dug out the change of clothes that I took with me to work out of my bag and tossed them in the hamper, set the books I had taken to read on the table, and stripped off the clothes I had been in for a day. If this sounds like some kind of ritual, it was. I had been doing it pretty much the same way for the last 5 years. I have had Nala almost as long as I have worked this shift. I stopped and petted Nala, and pulled some clean clothes out of the drawer. Unlike what I had worn to work, these would be my true self. My first day home on Monday, I was usually too tired to think about anything else, so I put out a sports bra and panties. I then got into the shower. I wasn't much one for baths, so I took long showers. After a weekend of being Tom, it would feel good to be myself again. I washed myself a few times with Caress Scarlet Blossom body wash, and by the time I was done, I felt and smelled more like myself. I liked to use Teen Spirit Pink Crush for some reason. I had tried it on a crazy whim once, and liked the smell. Some jasmine body spray, and I felt back to normal. Nala was already rubbing up against me, but I put her out of the room until I could get dressed. I put on the panties and bra, and then got a t-shirt and shorts out of the drawers. I looked in the mirror at the strange combination that looked back. I had the combination of the face of a man, and when I didn't have it covered over with loose clothing, some of the features of a woman. I had been prescribed hormones for a couple of years a few years ago, but had to quit taking them due to health reasons. They had been one of a number of possible causes for a blood clot, but I couldn't take a chance on using them again. I have had it brought up over whether I was a serious transsexual because I didn't find another way to get them, but I'll go into that later. I was too tired to do much because of my job. I am in charge on weekends at a Christian homeless shelter. I ran the place basically from Saturday morning until Monday morning. At 55, I had more experience with the subject than most people ever would. I was born into a good family, but into the late 60s and early 70s I had a problem which I had no context at the time to understand. In fact, it gave me a lot of rage. I didn't really understand the conflict inside me between seeing a boy on the outside, but feeling like a girl on the inside. I can't say how much I knew I was a girl, because again, there was no context. But I had a lot of rage that I didn't know how to deal with. I did get some girls' clothes from various sources, and did feel comfortable wearing them for reasons I didn't understand. I've only started to really understand some of that by exploring it with a counselor I really trust for the first time ever recently. What really started a downward spiral was getting caught. I didn't get caught dressed, but my stash was found. I remember my parents being so upset at what they couldn't understand either, but I already thought I was a freak, so I wasn't going to help. They sent me to a psychologist, but it didn't help, because I didn't trust him either. Besides, it didn't take me long to find an alternate. The drinking age in my home state at that time was 18, and I lived that at late 16. It was a pretty easy escape, and I managed to cover it over long enough to graduate high school. But then, I realized just how bleak my future looked. I had barely gotten out of high school, and had no real hope for the future. This was still the mid-70s though, and the romantic idea of taking off on the road looking for something better was still alive. So, one night I packed my old Boy Scout backpack with some stuff, tied a sleeping bag on it, and walked out to the nearby interstate and stuck out my thumb. There had to be something better somewhere else, so I figured I would go there to find myself. I did a lot of things to survive over the next 17 years. One thing I didn't do much was think about being a girl. Drugs and alcohol helped, especially LSD and mushrooms. I did think once in a while about what it would have been like, but it seemed I was having to be too macho. I returned home a few times during the first several years, but I didn't bring up the clothing, and neither did they. When I left the last time, I realized that it was just too painful. I never looked back for over 10 years. For around 5 years after I left that last time, I seemed to lose myself, both in the sense of who I was as a man, or even who I really was. I got into running a drug business, and although we were honest for the most part, we could be ruthlessly efficient. Although there was a softer side to me, I only let it out at times with the closest of friends. The only bright spot was during a time when I was away from the business for a while. A friend had left some stuff with me while she went to jail. I lived in a cheap hotel room at the time, but it was my own space. Being around Brandy's stuff awakened old feelings in me that drugs couldn't hide. It was wrong, but after a while, I couldn't quite resist it. First, it was a pair of panties. Then, I started wearing them all the time. She was a small woman, so I found that with the fleshy man boobs I had always had, one of her bras fit fairly well. Then it just seemed to go on from there. One of my worst moments came though, when someone saw me through the room's window. I didn't stay around for any of the ridicule. I left the stuff behind and never went back. I was back in the business again, and one night I had eaten a lot of mushrooms, which we had originally gotten to sell, but instead decided to keep and eat ourselves. These were extremely potent ones called cubenzas. I remember falling asleep after thinking about dressing in Brandy's clothing. She had been 19, so a lot of it was teenager-type stuff. I started to wonder for the first time freely what it would have been like to be a teenage girl. I guess between the mushrooms and some image I might have seen somewhere, I started thinking of a girl with dirty blonde hair and blue eyes like I had when I was a teenager. I wasn't sure where the thought came from, but she wasn't like model-looking or anything. She was pretty, but not more than average. It was really bizarre in that she had on an outfit I remembered having in the stash when I was 15, although I certainly had never looked like that. It was a gray tank top with a black skirt. Unfortunately, I fell into a deeper sleep, and the image was gone. For years, I couldn't remember that experience again clearly. It was like the ghost of a dream, something that haunted me, but could never bring back. From the pinnacle of success, feeling on top of the world, I barely escaped when the drug business collapsed. I was back on the streets, in a worse state than ever before. I had decided to rededicate myself to God, and really meant it. I wish that meant it was easy to get myself out of that life. It took 5 years to finally arrive in the place where I would achieve that in 1994. I had been to the place where I would get off the streets at several times before. This time when I went there, I was convinced I would never get off. I had given up and frankly wished God would take me home to heaven, because he was obviously done with me here. Tanya was so deeply buried that she was some deeply buried dream. But then I found the program. I had been staying at the shelter where the program was at. This time I wasn't interested, but had become friends with one of the staff, who talked me into it. The program was good, and got me really going after God. But being sober and straight also had a side effect. Part of being wasted allowed me to not think about my female feelings. I kept those to myself, but managed to not only complete the program, but get a job. When I got the job, I was really starting to think about when I graduated, and what it would be like to have my own place. I did get my own place, and had some money saved up. I started to think about whether I would just stay where I was at with the female side, or start to explore it. I was 36 by then, and I just didn't know what to do. I guess by then there were ways to get support, but I didn't know any way to find out without the internet back then. When I moved into my own place, I decided that I had to explore myself. It was kind of funny looking back on that, remembering the first time buying first panties and bras. I went to discount and thrift stores because I had no idea what sizes I was. It is a wonder that I was never seen by anyone I knew. Once I got those established, I started buying clothes with the same problems. I don't think I understood why I was at first attracted to both adult and teen style clothes. I had some outfits that were just what I would see teenagers wearing if I could get them. I guess later I would realize that I was longing for the chance to be a teen girl that I never had. I don't know what might have happened if I could have afforded to stay by myself. But I lived in a really bad place, and the opportunity to move in with a roommate was too tempting. She was nice, but I knew that I couldn't dress when she was around, even though this was a huge old house. I kept some stuff around, but then my parents came out to visit. I had started communicating with them while I was on the program, and when they came, I still couldn't tell them. By then I had a better understanding of who I was, a woman in a man's body, but I didn't have the heart, because they were just so happy to see me. When they came, I didn't think logically about finding somewhere to stash my stuff. I threw it away. Then questions came: could I really be a girl if I could give it up that easily? This would happen again when they came out there the next year. Then they gave me a ticket to visit Florida, where they had retired to. In my travels, I had never been in the area where they lived. It didn't take long for both of us to figure out I should move there. But during that time, I had a falling out with the roommate, who I had lived with for 2.5 years at that point. For a couple months I was back in survival mode. I lived in a place too tiny to even move around. I never stayed around the place much, so I didn't even bother to try to be myself. By the end of that time, I felt like I was going insane. I didn't realize at the time, but a big factor was that I hadn't been going to church. I was ready to start smoking pot again, just stay sane. But God had another plan. I saw an ad in the local paper for the winter shelter that the place I went through the program at ran for the city. I called, and was immediately offered one of the top jobs, because the same people were in charge as when I was there. Within a couple of weeks, I had found a new apartment, and discovered that an old friend who I had lost touch with was going to be working with me. I quickly realized that God was in this, because a staff member at the mission who I became friends with turned out to be an assistant pastor at a church several blocks from my new place. I settled into the new place, and my old feelings popped some, but I had buried them pretty well out of necessity. Then, they came roaring back. In my new place, I lived right around the corner from the laundry room. The first time or so I went in there, everything was normal. I only had to go every couple of weeks, so I'm not sure when it happened, but the next time I went in, I saw a pile of clothes on the table. They were adult women's clothes, but I didn't look at it beyond seeing a couple of pairs of panties on top, and what looked like a nightgown. I went in there a few days later, to do a separate load, and they were still there. I also noticed that when I came home late at night from work that the laundry room wasn't being locked like it was supposed to be. That altogether did it. A few days later, I slipped in there when I came home from work and grabbed a pair of the panties. If they hadn't fit, who knows what would have happened next. But they did. I wore them the whole next day, and thought if they fit, maybe some of the rest of the stuff would. I took a couple of loads of laundry in the next day, and when it was dry, dropped it on the pile of clothes and then put it all in my hamper. I don't know why I was so paranoid, because no one was really watching. When I got inside my apartment, I immediately dug out the clothes. I tried on the nightgown, which was a tight fit but wearable. There were a couple of blouses that would fit, but the bras were too small. But by now I was caught up in it. I had been shopping in the discount store that was near my house before, and started all over again to find the right sizes, but managed to over a week or so. I didn't have a large apartment, but it was my home, and I truly experienced being able to be Tanya when I wanted, at least at home. At first, I gravitated to younger style clothing. I didn't understand that, because I thought at the time that I should be wearing only clothing of people in their late 30s, which I was. Again, I was lacking any guidance, so I didn't know that at least some of the time, I just wanted to be the teenage girl I had never had a chance to be. This blissful period ended when I moved to Florida. I was renting a room from my parents, then in a Christian house, then back again. I threw myself into church and Bible school to avoid thinking about it, but I began discovering the internet. I had figured out finally that I was transsexual, but couldn't deal with it in any way, because I was just too scared. I completed Bible school, feeling like I was living a double life. But when the call came asking if I wanted to return to New Mexico to work at the place I had gotten off the streets at, I didn't hesitate. And it didn't take long to return to my old routine. I found other places I could shop at, and was comfortable in that I had a larger apartment than before. The first trip my parents made out from Florida, I had to actually rent a small storage place, but this time it was worth it. Then after a few years here, everything changed. I found a website that was supportive of the transgender community here, and then found a therapist. I had always thought the cost would be way too much, but had good insurance and was surprised to find out that she was covered. After some sessions with her, she steered me towards an endocrinologist. Again, the insurance covered it, because I had a thyroid problem. It was a big leap of faith and guts to take hormones. I took them for several months, before an old problem with swelling in one of my legs caught up to me. I was sure that it wasn't related, but when she told me I had to quit taking them, I listened. I then went through one of my worst periods. Physically, I was ill for most of a couple years. I was barely able to work and not do much else. The last year of it, I got hit with several bouts of not being able to eat over one winter. I had been extremely overweight, and so I never noticed much if the hormones had done anything for me. With a lot of weight gone, I noticed very quickly. I had been buying bras for breasts that were bigger, but fleshy. Once that was mostly gone, I still had breasts, but for real, somewhere between an A and B. And I had an ass, so to speak. This suddenly made me very nervous, because I had something real to conceal. I also had to start buying new clothes for Tanya too, not just my male body. God was good to me in that right about the same time, I found a therapist who was also a minister in the denomination I had settled into. The church I went to didn't approve of LGBT in general, but unless they were pressed on the issue, didn't bring it up. The counselor helped me in a lot of areas. I was the one that brought up what was the biggest question bothering me but thought was too weird to ask anyone, even online. I finally brought it up one day. I asked her, when I die and go to heaven, will I be a male or female? I don't think I was doubting that I was a woman, but there was something that caused me to wonder about that. The counselor helped me to work through the thought process for myself. In the end, I told her, I believe that I will be a woman, and personally I believe in the theory that everyone will be 30 or so. The one problem I am having is I can't imagine what I will look like. This was true. I had always had a problem with that, imagining myself as a literal woman, what I would look at. I had the vision or hallucination of years before, but that was, if anything, me as a teenager. Then one day, something happened. I was looking through a magazine and saw a woman. She was in running clothes and standing on a bridge leading to some stairs that went up a mountain. The background wasn't important to me, as the woman in the picture had me almost hypnotized. With her hair and reasonably athletic build, she looked about like I might have. In the article, it said that she was 30. I knew it wasn't me or anything, but I saved the picture. I knew that I finally had a frame of reference as to what I probably would have looked like. Things started to get more violent at work. Working with the poor and homeless can be very dangerous. It's a concept that a lot of people understand on one level, but don't really get it all until they see it happen. Plus, there had been a couple of workplace shootings in our town. The combination of things led to a class being held by the retired cop that was in charge of security. A plan was created, along with all the other plans for natural disasters, fires, and everything else they thought could happen. I had been in on the development of some of them myself, because I had lived through a few of them. There was a sense of real possibility to someone armed going nuts there. Basically, he said it came down to fight or flight. It was a natural response, so you had to be ready for either one. I had always been a fighter, so I knew I would go after an attacker. It had gotten me in trouble before at the shelter. I had always known that I wasn't going to die quietly in bed. It was something that didn't terribly bother me, and I knew it would be better than dying a slow death of an illness or something. I just figured when the time came, it would come. But when the dreams started, I didn't know what to make of them. I was at the shelter one night sleeping over and dreamed I was in the courtyard. I was talking to some people when I saw a woman. She looked like the woman in the picture to some degree, but not identical. She had on a pair of jeans and t-shirt like a lot of the homeless people, but not literally. She went up the ramp into the building and I went after her. I couldn't find her. I checked with security at the gate and no one had come in that looked like her. Then I woke up. It was pretty eerie, but I didn't think too much about it. I had dreams like that sometimes, pulling things I had read somewhere and mixing them with real life. But I had some more. She would be dressed differently in each one, but always smiled at me and never said anything. This happened over the course of a month or so. Then one night, before I was supposed to go to work, the dream changed. This time we were both on the bridge that led to the stairway up to the mountain. She said, "The time is almost here. You need to be ready. There will be great danger, and do what you know is right." I knew I sounded frustrated when I said to her, "What is going to happen? Why am I in danger? Who are you and what is this place?" She said, "You know who I am, and very soon, we'll climb the stairs and you'll see." I looked at the stairs, and tried to see where they went, but all I could see was a cloud. It was a great cloud, with thunder and lightning, but no rain. I turned back to the woman but she was gone. When I woke up, I found I was crying but wasn't sure why. I wasn't able to sleep again that night. I got up, even though it was way before time to catch the bus down to work. I read the Bible for a while and prayed, and felt the presence of the Holy Spirit as strongly as I had ever felt it. I showered and caught the bus. When I walked into work, I felt a strong urge to share the gospel again with some guys on the program who I didn't think were saved. This just kept on until we opened up the day shelter after lunch. I told the 2 security people that came in to really watch, as I had a bad feeling. I had gone back to my office when I heard the radio we used to communicate suddenly come on with the voice of the person at the gate. He was yelling, Gun, he has a gun. I ran across the alley to where the main building was. Once I was outside, I heard what I knew were shots. I figured I could get closer inside the building, with its multiple hallways and doors. I called one of the security people on the phone, hoping she was okay. She answered and said, "Do you have a gun?" I said, no, I had never been okayed to carry one in case of an emergency. She told me to meet her in the dining room, as she had managed to get me something. I could hear that the shooter had gotten into the main lobby. Security had opened one of the doors into the interior of the building to give people to run, but the shooter was coming closer too. I finally saw security and she was carrying an ASP. An ASP is my favorite nickname for a telescoping wand. I had carried one in my day pack for years when I was on the streets. She said, "I remembered you telling me about using this, and one of our guests turned it in when he came in today. I just don't know what you're going to do with it." Frankly, neither did me. I said, "We have to get me close enough to him for an ambush so I can use it. We have to draw him into the halls." She said, "If you're crazy enough to go after him, I guess I'm crazy enough to be bait." We hugged, and then she let me into one of the offices right around a corner in the hall. I told her, "You've been a little sister to me since you've been here. If we don't make it, I'll see you on the other side of the bridge." She gave me an odd look, but nodded and took off. I didn't know where that had come from right then, but it just sounded right. I heard her yell something, and then shots. She was fast, which I guess was why she volunteered, but when she came around the corner I could see she had been hit, somewhere in the arm probably. She didn't even look at me to give me away. When the shooter came around the corner, I made a mistake. I hadn't known he was going to be as big as he was, and only grazed his gun arm the first time. He fired a shot down the hall, but I don't think it hit anything. The second time I hit him, but when he dropped the gun and howled in pain he came up with a gun in his left hand. I stabbed out with the heavy end of the ASP, going low for his groin and connecting with something. He yelled in pain, but managed to bring the gun around. He fired and I felt a huge blow to my side. I went down, but landed near the gun he dropped. I rolled away, but got hit again in my right leg. I fired, not knowing if it would do anything but distract him, but it hit him in the leg. I saw that it was a revolver and had 2 shots left. I knew this was it, I couldn't let him go on. I stood up for a better shot and fired as he fired. I felt a punch in my chest, but with everything I had, I raised the gun one more time and shot him in the head. Suddenly I was falling. All my strength had gone into that last shot. I didn't much feel myself hit the floor. The security woman was checking me out, trying to figure out how to stop the bleeding. I told her, "Just make sure he's dead. Then worry about me." She said, "Oh, he's dead all right. Your last shot took him right through the head. But don't you die on me. You have to live." But her words were getting fainter. Suddenly I was on the bridge. She was standing there, in a radiant white dress. I didn't even have a sense of myself. My body was just a physical shell. She took me by the hand and said, "Come on, it's time to go." As we started up the stairs, I thought about how my old body, with all its old injuries and arthritis, would have never made the climb. I looked back and saw a faint view of the paramedics shaking their head as they knew I was gone. The shooter was dead and I had saved as many people as I could. Sometime during the climb, as I was focused up, I realized that the woman was gone. As I climbed, I felt the rustle of the dress around me, and realized that I was finally her, the real me. One of the first people to meet me at the top was my dad. He said, "I wish you had told me in life about who you really are, because you are absolutely beautiful. There are some others here who are waiting for you." There were others who I had met along the way who I had never seen again, and was happy to see that some of them were who they really were too. I thought, I guess you never know who might have to be hiding who they really were. Then I saw him, the one I had always longed to see. The one who had been my savior and friend, and also my God. With tears streaming down my face, I ran to him as there was applause. I finally understood about the idea that there was truly rejoicing in heaven when someone comes home. I would forever be able to be the real me.